7 days ago, this car was complete. 3 days ago, it was cut off from here all the way to here. Yesterday, we got everything fitted, welded, make sure all of the panel gaps are good to go. And today, we need to get this thing ready for paint. So to start, I need to go ahead and grind down all of the welds for the pillar window that we have and for the rocker window that we have. The reason we got to do this is so we could properly weld in the structure underneath the window to make sure this car is nice and safe and sound. I also need to go through, get everything reseam sealed, get the body filler work done on the pillar and rocker, and hopefully, if we have enough time, get this thing in primer and ready for paint. To properly and efficiently get these welds ground down, there are two separate tools I'm going to be using. One is this mini little belt sander here, Milwaukee. I love this little guy. And of course, a grinder with a 36 grit roll-lock disc. We are all finished up with grinding down the welds. Now we need to go through and put just a little bit of body filler on each of the welds. Now there is some excessive body filler right down in here from the previous owner. So before I fill these, I'm gonna grind all that off. I'm gonna pull out my my stud gun, pull that out as far as possible so that we do not have excessive amounts of filler. Five minutes of pulling. Now we need 1/10 of the filler. Everything is cleaned up. We are ready for some filler work. Today's filler of choice, U-Pull Fantastic Body Filler. I really like this stuff. There's a couple different fillers I really like, this being one of the tops. Now a lot of people say, well not a lot, but some people I've seen in the comment section say that you must put down your sealer, epoxy primer, whatever, zinc, etch, whatever you want to use over bare metal before body filler. I've never done that. I was taught by the professionals, body filler always goes over bare metal. That's what I've always done, never had a problem. I'm sure either way it works. I'm just doing what I was taught. Be sure to mix it up nicely. Put in some of our hardening cream. The biggest, most important thing is making sure you got it fully mixed up. So I'm gonna start off with 40 grit, just get all these ridges off. If I was better at applying our filler, we probably wouldn't have to do this. We could just jump right to 80 grit, but all these really, really high ridges, go ahead and knock those down so we can start building the shape. Now I'm moving on to 80 grit. I'll get the shape of it down with our 80 grit, and then I'll refine that 80 grit sand scratch with a 180. So I have the shape of everything built out exactly how I think it should be. I'm gonna go ahead and finish it off with this glaze. So what the glaze is going to do is fill all of the little pits, sand scratches, and any tiny imperfection. We're gonna start sanding this down to 180 and then finish it off with some 320 grit. After the 320, we can move on to the primer work. Glaze goes on much cleaner, smoother, and thinner than the filler does. So we're gonna knock this down with 180 to start. And now we're finishing with 320 grit. And that guy right there is ready for primer. We are finally ready to lay down some freaking primer. I'll be priming from right up there all the way to the back of the pillar, and then I'll probably start here and come all the way down here. There's nothing else that is gonna need any sort of filler primer. Epoxy primer, that's a different story. A lot of the engine bay is gonna get some epoxy primer. But let's go ahead and get this car fully masked off. Gotta mask off the interior, and of course I don't want overspray on the quarter panels in the back of the car and all that good stuff. So I'm gonna be laying down some plastic. Might be a little bit overkill, but I want the rest of this car to have no sort of overspray. All right, quick and dirty mask job. That'll do the trick. I'm only spraying a little bit in this area here. So first up, we're gonna go through, get everything wiped down with wax and grease remover. Now with everything cleaned up, before we put down the filler primer, I need to go ahead and apply some self-etch primer. Any bare metal area needs either epoxy primer or self-etching primer. I like the self-etch for smaller areas like this. If we have for example, a sandblasted engine bay, sandblasted undercarriage, the epoxy primer works really, really well for that. We're gonna do 2 to 3 light coats of this. All this does is provide a nice corrosion resistant barrier so that the metal does not rust. You should have something looking like this with the self-etch primer laid down. Let's go ahead and lay down our primer. With the primer still wet, you can always get a rough idea of how good your bodywork was. And I must say it looks tremendous. So that is of course very, very pleasing. Let's do 3 coats total of primer just because I want this thing perfect. I'm willing to do a little bit of extra sanding to get the excessive primer off. All of the primer work is done. I did 3 coats on there, 3 coats on there. Now I want to wait a few days. Primer does shrink with time, and 3 or 4 days should be plenty to go ahead and wet sand it. And then this thing will be ready for paint. Moving on, we need to re-seam seal a lot of things. Now thankfully, the passenger side is all factory, and I'm going to try to replicate all of the factory seam seal on the firewall. There's some seam sealer that goes up in here, and then as you can see all through here, we need to replicate that in the engine bay as well. I need to go through, get all of the areas that are going to be seam sealed cleaned up with a wire wheel and with some Scotch-Brite. And the seam sealer I prefer is this 3M. Really nice stuff. It is a 2-part sealer, but it works very well. So I got everything cleaned up. I like to mask just so we have a nice clean line when I pull the masking tape back. And we are ready to start applying our seam sealer. Starting way back at the firewall. Arguably the interior is the most important. Obviously you don't want a bunch of water going into your interior, but engine bay is also important. All of the seam sealer is done. If I had to do it again, I would have pulled the tape a little bit sooner, just so the seam sealer can kind of settle down and not have a hard edge. Now keep in mind, of course, it's not going to stay black. It's all going to be painted. So that's seam sealed. Seam sealer is done up there. This whole section here. And then on the inside, I moved to it's a self-leveling seam sealer. And I think that's going to match the OEM look a little bit better. So that's why I did that. Next video should be the paint day. Paint day for the engine bay, paint day for the door jambs, and paint day for the interior. All the exterior panels, of course, are going to be painted separately. But overall, I am very happy with today's progress on the giveaway Evo 10 build. Hope you guys enjoyed. Peace out, my good friends, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.